Welcome to our two guest speakers, Professor Sibu Moyo from Stellenbosch University and Prof. Michael van Wyk from UNISA. Both of them will be talking to us about strategies for supporting postgraduate students in terms of funding. We know there's a high demand for that. And before Prof. Moyo start, I just want to say, for those of you, most of you probably know, she's the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Internationalization at Stellenbosch University. I first met her when she was still at Durban University of Technology. So she will start, and she wants to make this interactive, so she will warn us certain time slots where we will ask for your input and opinion. And then there will also be time at the end for further questions before Prof. Michael starts. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this presentation for us, Prof. Moyo and Prof. van Wyk. And now I will hand over to Prof. Moyo.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you everyone for being part of this session. So I've been introduced and I was given the theme to focus on, which is dealing with challenges of postgraduate funding. And I hope that we can have an interactive session. I will ask you a few questions as we go along, but I want you to think about, I think as we start off, to really think about in your own environment where you are right now, what do you think are the key challenges around funding? So I've organized the presentation so that first of all, we look at the context, which is, we know that the context now is, yes, funding for postgraduate studies, we know is crucial for research, but the context is that the funding to universities for this kind of support for postgraduate students is uneven across Southern Africa. And because this session, of course, is the Postgraduate Association for Southern Africa. And in the South African context, of course, we have similar challenges. The competition between economical and social economic needs and developmental needs competing with higher education are also at the fore. So we know we have limited funding sources amongst high demand. Of course, growing postgraduate enrollments, of course, which outpace available funding. And then the socioeconomic barriers in our context, which students face, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds. And then, of course, in this presentation, one of the things which I hope that at the end we can look at is really discussing some of the opportunities that we have, that is exploring successful funding initiatives and cause, and then highlighting the best practices that we can find across the sector. I also want to just mention that when you think about funding, before I start maybe talking about the economic challenges, is that if you think about it, within Africa, and especially sub-Saharan Africa, the unemployment rate amongst youth is very high. And this also feeds into other areas. Because of that, you do get, of course, issues around when you're looking at economic indicators. I mean, if the unemployment rates are high, the number of startups and businesses which are sustainable perhaps is not as high as it should be. And that's why sometimes you get people not being able to get formal employment or starting up their own enterprise. So all of that has an effect. So if you look at the key challenges in postgraduate funding, the economic constraints contribute to that. And those can be broken down to reduced funding to public institutions. And then, of course, limited competition for limited private sector research grants. So the grants, you will see that in most of the courses that come will focus largely, let's say, on health-related research, but not other areas. So there's a difference between the funding domains, which we get, where we get costs from. And then also disparities in access to funding based on socioeconomic backgrounds. And depending on the quality of the proposal that you write, it's very competitive to get this funding in many cases. And then, of course, the need for us to have initiatives that contribute to, of course, prioritizing inclusivity and diversity. So one of the things we look at is that, yes, there is funding which people apply for, but if you look at the gender and the profile of people who are getting these grants, there's a difference there. And then, of course, administratively at an institutional level, university level, the application process, complexities around that. Yes, we get calls. Sometimes, yes, you can get a call, but the time to prepare for the call, the quality, who checks the quality of that call, and the criteria to make sure that when your application goes through is successful, that can be a challenge. So when I look at maybe the funding landscape within South Africa itself, I mean, we have a number of government funding sources, mainly in the South African context, it will be the National Research Foundation. Just excuse me, my battery stays low. I just need to change that. But then we also know that the Department of Science and the Department of Education and Training also gives grants, and also the Department of Science and Innovation, some of the science councils, and I imagine across sub-Saharan Africa, there are some grants through the government, the national governments of the countries that we have, and also some of the science councils. It's not every science council that is funded at the same level, because those differences exist. And then some of the data also shows, private sector funding, and this can come from corporate and industry-sponsored bursaries. I know in our case, I just took two examples there. On the energy sector, we have SASO and ESCOM, which also help in terms of some bursaries for engineering students. And for fields like engineering, science, and technology that align with business needs, they get more funding opportunities in comparison to the humanities. Again, I think something which I just want to highlight. And then you see that the other source, of course, is from universities. But universities, I think, are funded in different ways, depending on the type of university and also the level of funding and the history of that university. Within the South African context, we know that, universities are obviously at a different level historically due to the funding landscape itself. Some are well resourced, but of course, even though we are not able to deal with all the needs that are there, and some are not so well resourced. So those differences appear. And then I just decided here to just look at the current postgraduate funding calls, some examples. But of course, these don't cover Southern Africa, but I just thought it's important to look at for example, the organizations that give funding. So for example, in this case, we have the National Research Foundation, which focuses on the innovation and skills masters and doctoral scholarships. These are aimed at students in all fields, actually, not just research-intensive universities. Then there's the extension support for masters and doctoral students. And then I did mention the Department of Science, Innovation, and NRF course. So, for example, there's a call which is open for 2025. And then there's also the Mandela Rhodes Foundation Scholarship, and then those that come from science castles and international funding organizations. I should just mention that when it comes to the last block, which looks at the international grants, the focus on the Africa Union and European Union innovation agenda is important, because what we've seen is the alignment. So if your proposal aligns to the areas that are listed there, like public health, innovation and technology, green transitions, and capacities for science, it has a better chance, of course, of getting funded on those frameworks. And then I know that recently there was a meeting with which was organized in the South African context here with the National Research Foundation in launching the Next Generation and Emerging Researchers Symposium, which was held from the 23rd to 25th October. And then this one also, the criteria there, this was for funding doctoral and postdoctoral fellows, and it was just bringing these emerging researchers together. And they do talk about funding, of course, as one of the challenges. So I just highlighted this, that there was this call which was open, an engagement with the National Research Foundation, again, which looked at the next generation and emerging researchers. And this cohort is important for us to support the research system. And then, this one is a call. I think I just shared here the slide for Mandela Rhodes Scholarship, which you can find. This is open. It is online as well. You can, they normally open their calls. I have not read the details on this one, but I know that they do, it's still open, and you can apply for that, I think, using the online platform. So if you look at the good practices for securing postgraduate funding, So there's early research on funding opportunities. So important in this area is really identifying the application windows for scholarships and grants well in advance. The challenge that we find is that for most students, when they get this application, the time that the call comes and the time that it's there to complete your application is very short. And then the other part, I think, which is important to mention here is that during that time in your university system, if you look at your university system, in universities where the research office is well established and has got people who can at least look at the applications and quality check those, it increases the success rate for students to be successful in the grant application process. At this stage, most of these processes are left for the supervisor to check. And sometimes if the groups are very large, it is difficult for one to look at all the applications in terms of the quality check. So what is important is really at the early stage to really understand the timelines for these grants and then put mechanisms in place to support students, either as a group at the research group level, or in some institutions, this is centralized so that the center also is able to help. And then also the other part, I think, which is important in really understanding good practices for securing these postgraduate grants is being able to prepare a strong proposal. And usually this proposal and topics must align to what the core, the organization that is putting that core in place is focusing on. What are their, the vision, checking exactly what is it that this organization prioritizes and aligning the core to those priorities. The only challenge in this case is that each university and each country has got an agenda in terms of what they would like to focus on. And the challenge is that if the money is always coming from elsewhere and it is not money that the university, the country context invests in, then it is difficult to deliver on the research agenda of the country, of the university, if we always have to adjust the cause in order to match the funder, who sometimes can be a funder from abroad and so forth, and they may have other priorities. So in most cases, you find that researchers have to adjust to meet the priorities of the funder, whichever funder that is, giving the grant or putting out the call for the grant. And then the third part, I think, which is important around good practices is really being able to build collaborative networks with industry. And here, industry, it's really professionals, academic mentors, and the companies that might be interested in your area, alumni, and so forth. But I will ask you a question at this point, maybe to just think about the research that you do and think about who are the key stakeholders in your industry. And by here, industry, I don't mean just the companies. I just mean like if you look at your research. So if you're doing, let's say you're doing research, which is around, for example, you are looking at public health related issues, who are the key stakeholders in your area? Or if you're doing research, which is around climate change, who are the key stakeholders in your area? Which industries, which communities, which NGOs are part of your area, to think about that. And then really trying to think about how can one connect these dots. And that's why being in a research group sometimes helps you to be able to identify these industries so that you are able to leverage more opportunities. And we've seen examples. Just recently, we had Nature, which also hosted an event here looking at health research and how that health research links up with communities that are affected by the results and also by the research that is taking place, because that research has to be translated in any case. So considering the interdisciplinary projects that align with current funding priorities such as climate change, health equity, and others is important. But really stopping to think about, who are the key stakeholders that I can approach to align my project with, or to fund the project, or to collaborate with. And what are the priorities of that community, locating them within the community that we find ourselves in, and the environment and the government priorities of the country. In South Africa, for example, what we currently have now is the Decadal Plan, which is a 10-year plan that looks at our research and innovation platform. And in that are priorities. So obviously somebody applying, say, through the National Research Foundation or the Department of Science and Innovation, it is important to have an idea of what are these priorities, how is our work aligned to those priorities, and how can we pitch our application so that we are able to access the grants that are needed. So leveraging university support systems, this one is also another key area. So many universities offer workshops on grant writing and funding applications. And then also they seek out mentorship on peer review from faculty and peers to strengthen the application. So I did emphasize this, that, in order to access grants, the systems that are in place as an institution are important. And what we've seen as best practice that works very well is really having timelines that allow students to put their proposals together and then allow for a review process before these are sent to the funders. Yes, we know that the supervisor has the primary role to do this in terms of the science that goes into the qualification, into the application. But we've seen that groups that have a large number of students sometimes may struggle to make sure that each of the applications reaches the same level of peer review and quality that is needed. So I emphasize this point of mentorship as well as peer review from faculty and peers to strengthen the students' applications, especially, yes, from the supervisors. And then in this section, I thought that maybe it might be useful for us to just touch base really in terms of the University Research Office and its role. So universities of offices, and I'm sorry for a typo there, they offer a structured, some universities here, I meant to say that I checked some websites, and I know that University of Pretoria, for example, and also I know Stellenbosch and others, they offer a structured database and funding office specifically dedicated to helping students identify and apply for national and international grants. So your office will have grants. But the question they are going to ask is, so yes, there's a structured database, but once I write my proposal, is there somebody who can check, just to help to improve the language, the quality, and the alignment of that proposal? I think that checking is important. And then the other thing is really, I sort of focus on the, industry partnership programs. And this way, this is very strategic because if there are industries in your region, each university is anchored within its region. In that region, there are priority areas. So let's say if you are in a region which really focuses on if you're coming from KwaZulu-Natal, the sugarcane industry is a big industry, and trying to think about, okay, what are these industries around me doing? And the research that we are doing, how is it aligned to the priorities, and how can we co-design research that helps to set up a focus area that can help, students come in, postdoctoral fellows, and support the running course of that research. So having that industry partnership is important, not just in terms of signing an agreement, but practically setting up joint initiatives where students can be supported. And then the other part, and I think in Stellenbosch University, in terms of the alumni, I just use Stellenbosch as an example here, is really alumni-funded initiatives. These are also important because alumni end up in industries, different types of industries. So where we are located in the Western Cape currently, the wine industry, the farming in terms of grapes and so forth, that is a big area. And so I know our agri-sciences is one of the top faculties in terms of supporting, in terms of the research they do around agri-sciences. And just looking at the viticulture and, the wine industry sector, that's a big sector which has interest in terms of making sure they are, research that informs the industry itself. So they will sponsor students. They are happy to set up, in some cases, some joint chair initiatives. So some of the chairs we have are not just the national research funded chairs, but they are also industry chairs. And I will show you a little bit of the data on this later. I just wanted to put that on the table. And so when you think about, in terms of funding, so we know that funding challenges require a collaboration across all Quad Helix partners, be it government, universities, industries, and so forth. And then ensuring equity in funding will be essential for supporting a diverse, skilled research community. And this is true because most of the funding, if I look at the Stellenbosch University funding, we get our budget from contract research per year is over R1 billion. And over R1 billion, most of it is really around health research. And the health research fields get a lot of money. And in general, the science, engineering, technology fields get more funded than the humanities and other fields. So there is an inequality in funding. And so We know that the challenge is around also, this equality in what field gets funded more than the other and who funds these areas. And I think when you look at, I'm going to take law as an example. If I'm studying law and I want PhD sponsors, I want a database of which people are sponsoring people in law. It's not so easy to get a lot of sponsors in comparison to the health sciences, especially in our context. And I look at South Africa, but maybe in general, this might apply to other fields as well in Southern Africa. And then the context of research and funders alignment, of course, this part is also a bit, interesting because we have agendas which we say, okay, we have our local agenda, global and regional agendas. But as a university, we are also taken to task in terms of being asked what's the relevance of the research to the society. So those priorities compete a lot with global priorities because in most cases, if most of your funding is coming from international funders, they also have priorities which may not necessarily be aligned to our local priorities. So I think that it's a responsibility of each, funding agency, each government to make sure that there is at least, some funding which is directed towards research and postgraduate students, except that when you talk about typical taxpayers, the main issues that people are dealing with are around, okay, well, we don't have jobs. We don't have the basics which our country needs. Why are you investing in postgraduate study instead of, let's say, fixing the roads or doing this and that? So it's a bit of a challenge to see the alignment between the government priorities and education. Even though education, if we have more skilled people, these are the people who can get into the various fields, set up small enterprises, have skills that help us to improve our economy. We know that already from countries where this is the case. But of course, the current situation doesn't help. And then, of course, looking forward, a call to action for increased partnership between public and private sectors to bolster sustainable postgraduate funding is important. And then, of course, the emphasis on ongoing support and streamlined processes to encourage postgraduate research that drives societal impact in Africa as well. So what I wanted to do is that just to give you some examples, what are we doing in our case to create and attract funding? And before I do this, I want to just open up a session to get from you some input around, if you can just give maybe a list of one thing that that you find as a barrier to you. What is it? What is the challenge in terms of funding? What is the one thing that you can mention is a barrier for you in terms of accessing funding for postgraduate studies? Can I open up that for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I will go to what we are doing in terms of Stellenbosch? Can I ask if the organizers can just open the chat, and then if you can maybe raise your hand, because I'd just like this to be a dialogue session for a few minutes. So the question is around, what is it that you are doing that, that could be a challenge? Okay, I do see a hand there from Miss Sekote. I hope your pronunciation is correct. Thank you. You can go ahead. We can't hear you. Can you just put the volume for the speakers, please?
Ms. Sokote, you have been unmuted. Can you please unmute your mic?
Oh, she's still muted. Okay. Is there any other question while we wait for her to unmute herself? Can you just check that she can unmute? Okay. So can I ask any other questions? So what is it that you can say? It's supposed to be an interactive session. So if you think about postgraduate funding, what do you think is the biggest challenge that you face in your environment, taking your context into account? Can we have that discussion, please?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, speak louder. We can hear you a bit louder.
Okay. Good afternoon, Professor and colleagues. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my question. So I would like to know, how does one go about funding if you are not meeting the age criteria? So you fall just in the middle. For instance, I am a South African, a person of color, full-time PhD, but I'm 36 years old. And I couldn't start my PhD sooner because I had loans to pay off and other commitments. But now I have the time. I also know clearly what I want to, research. But now the funds are not available because I'm older. How does one, negotiate around those kinds of factors?
Mm. Can I just ask which faculty you're in as a matter of interest, your field?
Yes, so I'm in the Faculty of Education and I'm looking at a topic pertaining to higher education.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're at Stellenbosch University. Am I correct?
Yes, I am at Stellenbosch
Okay,
University.
good. Yeah, it's just that I just want to have the context into account before giving a very general solution. So the question you raise is very important because actually, so this is another inequality for most, and it's quite strange because in our context, a lot of the people do PhD much later, right? For various reasons. I mean, for women, of course, when you start talking about gender and so forth, some people decide to have kids first and then do their studies later. Some will have the kids and then go have their qualifications and then start a family and so forth. So this is a big challenge. And one of the things is that we know national funding can be limited in this case. But as a university, we also have started the postgraduate. We have a strategic fund which supports students, for postgraduate study, which it's a PSP program, but that is through the different faculties. And as far as I know, and maybe one should check that, we don't discriminate according to age, as far as I know. You can just check maybe with Mr. Nugent Lewis in the research office to just check what the story is in your case. And then you can try and see if you can resolve that. But I agree that there is bias on age. And unfortunately, it is sad because it does largely affect women because of the, different reasons, especially around when you start a family or when not to start a family. And for some grants, they probably will overlook that. But this is the case where, for example, the university, if we want to increase our postgraduate numbers, it is something that we have to take into account, right? So I would encourage you to speak to our research office and just see Mr. Nugent Lewis to just see exactly what is the issue. Because as far as I know, we should be we don't bias according to age, but you are right that grants do. And I don't know if anyone in the crowd has a solution to this question as well, who might want to add so people can add. I did see, I don't know if is there somebody who wants to add to that? Yes, Michael, you want to add? Yes, Professor Michael Fandme. Please,
Yes, Prof. Mojo, I think Mr. Sokoto can take the external route. The NRF in the Tutuka program, then you need to have your supervisor with you to help you through that process. I'm not sure because I hear you are not a full-time academic, so you are a full-time student, so you can go that route even. But I believe that Prof. Moyo have actually answered your question because you can apply for internal funding within your university. And I think there also your supervisor can play a crucial role in motivating why you need to have this funding. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. We really appreciate it. And then I see Francis as well. Jason?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
I'm a student from UWC, PhD first year student. And Ms. Sitole actually took my question out of my mouth. And another challenge that I am facing is I am part-time doing lecturing as well. But obviously with the challenge of funding, if you don't have funding, you have to obviously do more part-time work. And then the balance is skewed because you don't have much time for your research because you have to obviously eat at the end of the month. So I have been applying for funding and some funders is just not responding. But also the age limit is a bit of a challenge. To the point where I felt like, okay, today I'm going to come to this workshop and just find out what I can do. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to have to make that decision. Am I going to continue with this PhD or not? obviously due to the lack of funding. So yeah, I just wanted to share my comment. It's really a challenge if you have to juggle 3 part-time jobs, and obviously you have a family, you have a life outside of studies, but you also want to grow yourself and study, but the support is not always there. So that is my challenge at the moment. And my thoughts was like, if I can't secure anything, I'm gonna have to just not study and focus on working. And that's not really something that I want to do. So that's why I'm here today, and hopefully there's going to be some light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, that's just my comment and my, I don't even know if it's a question or a comment, but that's just what I wanted to share with everybody.
Yes, the first thing I would say that don't quit. I hope there will be light at the end of the tunnel. So can you just share with us what field you are in, Jason? Is it okay to call you Jason?
Yeah, it's fine. My name is Francis. My surname is Jason.
Oh, Francis Jason.
So,
yeah, I was feeling a bit
yeah.
weird the other way around. Sorry, Francis. Even Francis is for male sometimes. Eh?
Yes, definitely. They always say sir. I
Yes.
am female. So my surname is a name, and my name is a surname for some people. So I'm doing my master's and my PhD is focused on well-being and academic employees. So my focus is more on how our well-being impact on our performance, and not just our performance, but also our teaching, and how we are made to teach and we want to share our knowledge. But if our well-being is not intact, how is that going to influence us? I'm an industrial psychologist, and I'm also in industrial psychology field.
That's excellent. So I think this is an important question and area. So, but I would encourage you not to quit. Obviously, there should be a way forward. But of course, and I agree with you, being a part-time person and the age does give a problem, but it doesn't mean that it should be the end of the world. We always have to explore if there are ways in which one can get assistance. Yeah. I am not sure, because you say UWC, I'm not sure of what opportunities are there, but I would say that this again is a gap in our own systems as universities, because when you get for PhD and master's studies in the South African context, by the way, what is important is how long you take, because if you, whether you're part-time or full-time, I think we are funded the same way, because they work out the average time that it takes for your cohort of PhDs or masters to complete. So there's no reason why, as a university, perhaps one could not look at the some co-funding, some type of co-funding. And yes, working, there's nothing wrong with work, by the way, because in some of the institutions, best practices we see is that PhD candidates actually are treated as employees. So yes, you do some teaching, but also, if you can get a benefit around the, some support towards that study. It's just that our model is different, because when I look, for example, at some of my colleagues, when I was going to school, at the same time, some of our Swedish colleagues as PhD candidates, they got things like insurance, medical insurance, and so forth paid for, whilst in our case, I think you have to you get funded, and then you have to work a bit for the other funding. So I think that you still need to explore what opportunities are possible. I'm not sure if there will be an answer in this group, but I'm going to look at my colleagues, Professor Michael, and there's also Professor Enrique as well, to see if there's any other ideas that they can give you. But I would encourage you to push on, because having that degree will make a big difference in your own life, but also in the life of others, especially if you can co-supervise other students as well in future. I'm sorry I don't have the pace, but I would like to give you the money if I could, to say, let's give the money, but I think we should still try to explore that further. I see Mrs. Mitchell, VJ.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairperson. I think I have the same challenges that the two previous speakers had, except that I am going to turn 60 next year and doing my PhD. And I have the similar challenge. I cannot get funding because, number one, I'm a woman, I'm a mother. Secondly, because I work full time. There is no I haven't come across any bursaries that offer or bursaries for those of us who work full time, because there's an assumption that we have money, which I think is a bit skewed. So, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that, but also congratulate the other two ladies for sticking it out. I'm almost at the end. I think I've got at least a year still to go, but I think I'm funding my own way through the last 3 years. So I think certainly this, I mean, given our history as a nation that have fought other kinds of struggles, I think this is a real struggle, especially for us women who, as you say, have first had our families, but also, this idea that women don't have the cognitive functions to do this kinds of studies. But I think it's important that we raise this issue that funders must look at women, older women or matured women, but also women who have to work and want to study. Thank you so much, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much for those comments. I think, and the resilience that you show. And colleagues, just to say the Q&A I see is open, so you can also type the questions there so that we can deal with them as we go on. But just to say thank you very much for that. So it is a challenge, and I think for us, especially that are involved also with policymakers, it is something that we should be looking at our own data. The South African context is not slightly, actually, it's different from other contexts. So one has to take that into account. But of course, I think our funding models also need to look at how people are funded and in which fields as well. So I do see that, is there any other hand before I continue? So we don't have a solution yet, but we have said that, yes, it is a challenge. We just highlight the challenge there, but also look at opportunities. So the one thing I want to say is that maybe this also shows that as universities, we do need more strategies around how we look at our student profile, understanding who is a student, what is their level, and what's happening to students who are part-time. I know that if you're part-time, especially, the funding chances become even minimal. And yet we say to ourselves that we need PhDs to have transferable skills so that they get the industry experience and also the study experience, which means that when you finish your PhD, you are not unemployable, which is also important. So I think we need to understand that in our own funding framework as well. Okay, good. Is there one more question? I see a question in the chat. Maybe the university postgraduate officers can list some helpful links for scholarships for older students specifically. Okay, yeah, that's one comment. I don't know, Enrita, do you have any comment on your side? Any additions? Or Professor Michael, before I proceed?
Yes, Siba, I just want to, mark the fact that it's 15 minutes to. But, I also want to say, I think we don't give enough attention to NGO funding that is available out there. We often focus so much as supervisors on the formal routes of NRF funding and so on. I will share with the group after the event, I will share a platform that, advertise non-government funding for different types of research opportunities. And there's a lot of opportunities that fall without the formal structures that we have available. And I know I often get like weekly adverts of new funding opportunities. So that's quite important. The second thing I want to support what you have mentioned in terms of very often our eligibility criteria is very narrow and actually exclude the majority of our students. Because in South Africa, we know that a majority of our master's and PhD students are actually part-time students, often older students, and we neglect them completely in our funding instruments that we have available. So either it means that the universities, when they provide funding opportunities, will make sure that they broaden the eligibility criteria, or we will have to make sure that we engage with policymakers that have funding available, so that we make sure that there's better funding available for the underfunded groups that we work with.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I noticed that because two of the colleagues mentioned in this chat actually happen to be Stellenbosch University students, candidates, it might be useful, I think, if the team gets a hold of our research division, but I'll also mention it to them, of course, around what's happening around part-time PhDs, and we can get some more information just to understand our population. And thank you so much for offering to share the resources that are there. And I see it because we have 15 minutes. There was a hand up, but I think it has gone down. I assume there's no other hands up. So I'm going to just go back. What are we doing to attract funding? So what we found is that the funding from the government, our biggest funder is the National Research Foundation. And you may not believe this, but this for us has been the biggest funding source that we've got over the past few years. And what we are trying to do, of course, is really trying to make sure that we align our agenda to some of the areas. I did mention the decadal plan. I just want to give an example here. So this area which Professor Knox Makunga is in, she works with plants, medicinal plants. And in the decadal plan, there's some alignment there. And what we're trying to do is to put up these joint chairs where we bring in the researcher that is doing work in a particular area. And then we say as a university that we would like to put in 50% of the funding if the NRF can co-fund the area, because we know that money is the problem in any case. That's one way we are doing that. So we had a very good engagement with herself and also, for example, the Turkish embassy, they've got an agency, it's a Turkish agency, which, by the way, also does fund research and so forth, where they've managed to give us equipment to support the students who are studying in this area. And you may ask yourself, how is that related to the grant? But in any case, when you fund students, we found that most of the funding goes to the scholarship, which is a stipend. They use that for meals and transport, but they don't have money to run their research program. So getting equipment helps already to cut off one part of the expenditure, if you can source equipment, but also source co-funding for the group. So for us, I think just locating the research within the priorities is important, because that does help you to get funding. I will not talk about this because there's an initiative we host currently, which is a Nobel in Africa. Again, this one is really open to all African scholars. And through STIAS, which is this Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study, you can apply as a scholar to spend time there. If you're writing a book or something, spend some time, but you have to apply to, they've got the Isolomzo Fellowship, which also applies to young scholars, where you can apply for this type of funding. But what is important, of course, is to have your PhD and then apply for this initiative if you're associated to a university as well. What we are also doing is that I've mentioned just the one idea, but we also, one of the strategies for us is really around forming these clusters. There's the African, a consortium of universities, which involves a few universities in South Africa, where we've submitted a proposal for the establishing an institute for preparedness and prevention of pandemics. It involves a number of universities locally as well in South Africa. And through here, there's also some funding which is expected to go to support students. There's also the National Institute for Theoretical and Computational Sciences as well. In this platform, also with all the nodes that are involved within the South African network, also get some funding. It's not a lot, but of course, to support some students. And then I think the last one, which is an African initiative, Africa and Europe, is the Africa Research University Alliance and the Guild Research Intensive Universities, which are also applying to MasterCard Foundation. We have not got the money yet, but we've put in money there to support our programs, PhD programs going forward. So I just want to check if there's anything that might be useful, because I know that the main issues are around funding and how do I get funding. So I would just go quickly to the, I'll just, on this slide, I think it's important that I mention this, that when you write your funding proposal, because the other thing is that, when you are writing a proposal, you should understand who's the funder, what are their priorities. if you are using the South African funding landscape, it's important to understand the National Development Plan, the Decadal Plan, which runs from 2021 to 2023. And then there's also the Africa Union Agenda 2063. And more recently, there's also what we call the the white paper in science, technology, and innovation, which is also important for us to consider. When I asked this input here was something which I thought I would ask you, but I didn't get a chance to set up the Mentimeter. I had a talk once with, I think this must have been the colleagues from the African Doctoral Academy a while ago. I don't know if they would remember. So I asked here, what do you think are the key global and African challenges for research? And you can see funding is very prominent, and also the methodology that people mention, what method do I use to do my research? I don't have enough skills to actually carry out my research because most people start much later, as we know. Then, of course, there are other issues there around health, collaboration, and taking context into account and so forth. So these are real issues. Funding remains a challenge. And I think I think I've got only 8 minutes. Funding remains a challenge, but we know that, and it affects many people, even people who already have doctorates, they have the same issues. So we as universities need to find strategies and collaborate. Collaboration is probably the key, because what I've seen is that through the networks where we collaborate, we're able to set up joint programs, joint degrees, which are co-funded in some ways. And sometimes some universities can waive the fee, the tuition fee, so that the scholar then uses that money towards research. So I have mentioned considering priorities are important, and I think this was just about the priorities. And then on this slide, I just wanted to show you something that if you look at the number of masters and doctoral students, you see there, we have about 5,000, over 5,000 master's candidates and over 1,649 doctoral candidates. And this was all data in 2021. But what we find is that the pool of these people registered very little graduate, actually, not as much as we would like. So, for example, in that year with 1,649 doctorates, only about 310 graduated. So we are really concerned not just about registering doctorates, but also the throughput rate. And when we go inside to check the data, some of the delays, they are related to funding, but some of it, of course, supervision as well. Supervision capacity, funding is an issue. And then, of course, some of the candidates are working and studying, as you say. We register them as, full-time, but actually people are also working and studying, and that also has an impact. I think the other thing to look at is the postdoctoral fellowships, where we want to increase that number, but we don't leverage a lot of these of postdocs to help with some of the core supervision issues because of our own system. Yeah, I think I will stop here, Chair, because I would have liked to maybe just have more discussion than just presentation. So I'll stop sharing and maybe ask if there are any last questions that I should take into account. So are there any questions that you'd like to ask at the last round?
Yeah,
Or
just raise your
contributions?
hand, and then we will take more questions in the last few minutes
Yes.
before we start with the second presenter.
Any questions? Dr. Thiert, I see Dr. R.P. Thiert. Is it a correct pronunciation?
I think the person.
I don't see any questions. So I'm going to then, instead of just giving a PowerPoint presentation, is there a possibility for international students to, can you ask your question? I can't see the rest of the question. This is from who? I can't see who's asking the question in the chat.
Okay, so we
this
have
is from Gita. Yeah, Fita,
Okay.
sorry, Mr. Fita. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so they didn't, what do you call it, raise their hand. So I can't unmute them. If they'd like to read it out themselves, can you please kindly raise your hand so that it's easier for me to enable your mic?
The question is there a possibility for international students to be funded also? yes, there is a possibility. I know that, for example, in our own funding criteria, we do give we have we accept applications from everyone, and then we do look, of course, at your supervisor support of what you're doing, and that is taken into account. And I don't know if Mr. Nugent is in this meeting. If not, and if you're at Stellenbosch, I can see your email. You can contact again. I'll put it in the chat. Nugent in the postgraduate office. And which faculty are you in, Mr. Fita? If you can just clarify, that might help. Okay, Temba.
Yeah.
Temba, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one. I would like to ask, in case of funding, would someone would like to register for a PhD or a certain project with the Stellenbosch institution? How long does a person have to prepare to apply for that funding if in case in 2025 or 2026? That's my question. And I'm from the Faculty of Humanities from the University of Northwest. Yes, thank you. Your mic is muted. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you so much for that question. I'm saying that I think there's a call open. So if you can just check our website, and then I should really put the email of the person to contact. So there's a deadline. I think the timelines are that if you're applying for next year, the applications, I think, generally should go in now. As far as I know, I saw a call which is open for the postgraduate support program. And I think it was on LinkedIn, if you check. It should be on LinkedIn. So I don't have the exact times and dates. I don't know if there's somebody from the postgraduate office in this call. And if not, I would suggest that you contact us or check our website, or feel free to just drop a note from this session, and then I can just forward it to the right people. We'll forward your request to the right people to just check for you. I'm sorry I'm not helping you, but the call is open as far as I could remember.
That was very helpful. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think at least I've got a lead of where to go.
Okay, excellent. And then Miss Mashabisa. Okay, your hands are up. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Good day, Professor and everyone. I'm studying Masters in Engineering Management at Stellenbosch, and it's structured. I'm also struggling to secure funding. How can I go about it? Thank you.
That's a good question. I've never heard that one before for engineering, because they said that for you to qualify on that degree, you have to be working, right?
Yes.
Yes. So they expect you to kind of pay in something, but also you can arrange if you have to pay in installments. But the other thing is that if you can speak to your Vice Dean Research, I don't know if you know the Vice Dean Research, Professor Connie Scooter. I don't know if you know him. You should know at least who the Vice Dean Research is. And then if you can just tell them what your challenge is, because remember that on the other hand, if you don't communicate what your issue is, it's very difficult to see how to help you. So you can say, I am working, I'm earning so much, but it's not enough for XYZ. Please, is there a way that the faculty can assist? So work through them. And then, of course, if everything else fails, you can reach out. But normally, I think for that program, they assume that because you are working, then you should be able to pay as well.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Good. And especially if your pay slip shows that you are earning a lot, it will be difficult for you to get money.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Ms. Makubo.
We are running out of our question time. It's already 3:00. I see there's one last hand.
One last question, yes.
Yeah. Please, I would ask that you keep the questions short so that we don't run into the time of our second presenter. Go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Makubo.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. This was a very informative conversation. I actually wanted to post on the chat the PSP scholarship. I think maybe everyone's a bit struggling because I feel like it could help with a lot of the people's problems. So I have been privately sending it to all the Stellenbosch students, but it is available on the postgraduate funding support website. So if you just look for that, you will be able to find it. And I think my main struggle is the STEM thing, because I went from food sciences to education, and it was just sort of really, I did apply for funding in my first year and I didn't get it. And it was really, really disappointing, just because they said that it's not in their budget to fund education when I applied for the NRF. So the whole STEM prioritization is my biggest caveat. Is that the right word? I don't know. But yeah, that's my biggest challenge. And I don't think there's a way to overcome it. So yeah, but
They should be aware. I think COVID taught us that all fields matter, actually. And in order to solve the problem, you don't need only the laboratory hard sciences to solve that. So I think from the policy making side, it's something that we need to continue convincing people. But I'm glad that you probably have found yourself by now. I hope you've got support that you need. And thank you for sharing the PSP program. And for those who are at Stellenbosch that may not know, please check the website. We do send out a lot of information. And I know that we are putting in a lot in terms of postgraduate funding. Of course, except for the part-time colleagues, as mentioned earlier, where the challenges do prevail. But I take that, Ms. Makogo. Thank you so much for that point. And I think then now I'll hand over to Enrita because of the other session. I see there's a question in Q&A, but I can't read it, Enrita, but maybe we can deal with that. Yeah, it should be okay by now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Moyo. We will follow up, if there are any unanswered questions, we will actually, get them all together. And when we send material or also the link to the recording to colleagues, we will share that. And I also want to say, if there are any of the other university representatives here from postgraduate offices and so on, who would also like to share information about their funding opportunities, you are most welcome to actually do so. We will definitely send and share the information with all the delegates on the platform. But thank you so much for your time, Prof. Moyo. We really appreciate it. And now we will move on to our second session, focusing on the perspective from a supervisor who has large groups of students. And, when I started asking around of who from a supervisor's perspective can actually do this presentation, a number of colleagues said to me, you have to contact Prof. Michael van Wyk because he's very good at finding funding and helping students. Prof. Michael van Wyk is from UNISA. He's in the School of Education, and he's a rated researcher, C2, and he is the recipient of a number of awards. For example, the Chancellor's Award at UNISA for his productivity and his impact as a researcher. Prof. Michael, over to you. We're really looking forward to see how you actually support your students as well.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Dr. Van der Berg, for that introduction. Thank you, Prof. Moyo, for laying the ground of funding opportunities for students. Now, in this funding context, your supervisor is playing a crucial role. Now, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, yes. You can just...
Okay, thank you very much. So I will focus on the crucial role the supervisor play in supporting postgraduate students. Now, I will give you a couple examples. I will also indicate this year my name was appearing in Forbes, the influential magazine, for a study I done on AI when I was writing up the taxonomies of AI literacy and prompt writing. So that was for me an eye-opener. I was even unaware I'm in teacher education, and people ask me, how did you move into that? Because as a supervisor, I found out my students' interests. So my presentation is about setting the example of offering valuable insight and practical strategies as a supervisor. So I will speak more. Why is a supervisor so important for you in this whole funding? Because it's play a crucial role. I will first start off with a case study of a lived experience where the person was facing immense challenges, but they overcome that without funding. Secondly, building support systems, creating support space for the postgraduate students. Then I will move on the next third part of my presentation, because I will ask you questions. I cannot see whose hand is up. The qualities of a good supervisor. Why is that supervisor so interested in his students? And why is he interested in the students? And then the role that the supervisor play in helping the student to secure funding. And finally, I will give you a couple of examples from my own experience, how students I supervise. Currently, I supervise 6 doctoral students and 4 master students. So I have my limit now as a full professor, but I do things differently. So let's give you a case study. This case study is about myself. I pay for my PhD. I pay for my master's with my own salary. At that time, when I was doing my master's, I pay out of my own pocket. There was no postgraduate funding for me, no honors. I took up a loan at the bank. The bank was saying, okay, what is your collateral? I say my house. So I took a gamble. I took the risk. I complete my master's. In 1 year. I went full-time to the university. At that time, I was a teacher. And then later, I then skipped for 10 years. So between my master's and my PhD, there was not even my supervisor encouraged me to say, Michael, you have passed now this master's with distinction in education. Why are you not continuing with your PhD? There was such a discussion even in his office. Okay, I left. I went into the ranking of a school principal, a subject advisor, and a circuit manager in the Northern Cape and in the Western Cape. Then I decided to embark after 10 years in my doctoral study. And by that time, I was 40, 45, 47, 46, turning 46 at that time. So I came late in the academia. And I can relate to one of the students that is currently registered in Stellenbosch. I can feel your pain because I went through that. So during my doctoral studies, I nearly lost hope of my 2 supervisors. I got a South African supervisor and a US supervisor. Now, the South African supervisor was not a specialist in economics education. He was more in history. So he wasn't even interested in my study. Only once we have my name on as a supervisor. The American supervisor, that was a different way how I get into him. He was more interested in my study, in cooperative learning, at that time in economics education. So they did not listen to my challenge that I've experienced. And by the way, I was the only breadwinner in my house. And so I was appointed at the University of the Free State, and I nearly want to go to my studies, but my wife said, no, you need to go through this pain. You have 2 children and a family to feed at that time. So my fear was the failure in my study, in my doctoral study. That was it. And I have to move through 15 months of wasted time and effort because of the supervisors. So when I sent my proposal to the supervisors, after 3 months, they started reading it and giving me feedback, and the feedback did not help me. I think they think it was the normal way dealing with a postgraduate student experience. And I was not receiving time as feedback. And there was no postgraduate students that discussing. There was no groups and stuff. And so it frustrated me. But I decided one morning when I wake up and I said, I changed my attitude towards my study. I then implement strategies. The first strategies, I start writing now my chapters. After my proposal was approved, I sent my supervisors, you can't believe, in 1 month, 2 chapters. And I said to them, I never hear from you about my study. I was not even thinking about funding. At that time, I didn't have a laptop. If I go home and then after hours, I have to stay over in my office to use the desktop. There was no smartphone. There was no these things. So I went the hard way. And I decided to capacitate myself in research methodologies. I then bought a book called Cohen and Morrison. I studied that book. Every day I read a chapter in that book. And finally, with much courage and support of my family, my vision was to write my PhD on my office whiteboard. So on the whiteboard, I wrote big there, in the next 3 years, you will be called doctor. So every time when I opened my door, I saw that message. So I start speaking, believing, eating, and act on my dream to become a doctor. And I said, I want to be a special doctor. And I will not have my own students go through the same process that the supervisors treated me at that time. So after 3 years, it was resilience, dedication, and a will to succeed. I published 4 articles from that PhD and academic book. And there was, my supervisors told me, Michael, you are now a doctor. You are now on your own. What I've done, I study articles that was published in journals, and I put everything together. There was a trial and error. One of my first article was rejected 6 times because the supervisors was not interested. They said, you got your doctor's degree, you need to go on your own. I was a lecturer and I was now a doctor, but I did not publish. And then I decided 6 months after my PhD, I then start writing my articles. Some of my articles was in draft, but ultimately over a period of 4 years, I published 4 articles and a book chapter. So that is my story, and many of you are sitting here can relate the frustrations, not having funding, not even have a support and discussing that. Then decided as an academic at that institution, the previous one, I need to do something. I will never treat my students the same. I will never do the same to my students because I went through that pain, and I will always encourage my students. So I wrote an article on supervision and mentoring and coaching, and I used a platform called Invivo 14.0 is a computerized. So I to put my article in, and I said, okay, generate for me a cloud concept, and this is what came out. Supervision is very important in this process to help the student. The resources, financial support, assessment of every chapter, and how to deal with that. Why I mentioned this is crucial also to link to funding. And your supervisor have to play a critical role in this. The supervisor is also your coach. The supervisor is also your mentor. The supervisor knows the best if he takes you at heart. So in my next slide, why is it important that the supervisor and the student that he's busy with? So I'm talking now from a supervised perspective. Yes, the universities have certain systems, they have funding opportunities, but the funding opportunities can be sent to all of the students. The students can do them actually nothing if the supervisor is not coming to the party. So in my next slide, building support systems, creating support for students to see all the funding opportunities, whether it's internal funding or external funding. So I then set up an open communication. You and your supervisor set up. So I set up an open communication with most of my students when I start supervising. There's regular meetings and honest communication that prevent and helping misunderstanding, and even inform the students, look, NRF is external funder, or inside my institution where you are registered now, there is applications is coming. Let's look at it. So that is the open communication line. Student need to talk to me. We have clear expectations. If we want to apply for funding, what is the student responsibility and what is my responsibility as a supervisor? So we set clear expectations, why we want to apply for this particular funding and why it's important. We set timelines to complete the application, to writing the proposal. It takes time, immense time. Then mutual respect. So I cannot be the boss of the power guy and say to the student, no, it's not important. So I listen, it's very important. So supervisors have to listen. So you're building now a support system. You make the student better. Because that student one day will also become an academic. And if he's an academic institution, he will see the role that you have played in his life. And there's a lot of colleagues that I've supervised, and they was previous my students, now they are colleagues with me. Then also you need to be flexible to building that system. You must not say like when I was doing my PhD, Michael, I don't have time now for you. I'm going to a meeting. You need to set time aside. That is very important because you're dealing with a human being. And a student can become frustrated. Like I was frustrated. I nearly gave up on my dream. I was supposed to still be Mr. Van Wyk. Now I'm a full professor because I took a positive attitude and move on. So funding is very important for the student. Now, what makes a good supervisor to support you in your funding opportunities? That supervisor must be knowledgeable. And by the way, most of my students, they are very blessed to have me because I'm on different projects. I know how to write the proposals, the funding proposals, what to budget for conferences, budget for language editing. So your supervisor need to be knowledgeable of the internal and external funders. And what is the requirement for that? Your supervisor need to inform you about the various funding opportunities. And I do that on a regular basis with my students. I even inform them about the scholarships, like your Bill Gates scholarship. Bill and Bill Gates, they have a scholarship. The Ford scholarships, many other scholarships in Europe, about the Finland, the British Council. So I inform my students about scholarships. And I ask them, are you interested in this? If not, tell me so we can start with the application. These are the due dates. So that is very important that your supervisor must be knowledgeable of internal funding opportunities or grants, as well as external. Secondly, your supervisor, and I talk of myself, must be proactive. Where I shared funding opportunities with my students, whether external, internal bursaries, whether it's internal grants, and I seek, sometimes I have a personal discussion with them and say to them, listen, I think the funding that you have currently is not enough for your studies because you need other equipment. So let us see what is this call is about. Whether it's external funding, NRF calls, NRF, the National Research Foundation calls, whether it's British Council, whether it's Finnish or whether it's other African diaspora funding applications, have a look at that. So now you put aside the chapters of the student, now you talk about the funding. You also give support and care, that's very important. It's a very, very hard process for a student to go through. Like I put myself in the shoes of a student because on my journey, it was really traumatic. So you build a relationship. So that relationship become family. I can tell you I have students in Ethiopia, I have students in Ghana, Namibia, all over. And I still have the relationship with that students because I help them to get funding on different platforms. And I will show you now those things. I provide sometimes personal guidance because students going through a lot of trauma sometimes and anxiety. And sometimes they don't have the funding if they have to distribute questionnaires and stuff. Mentoring the student, even the supervisor have to play a role there. It's not only the funding, but they have to play a caring thing. And he have to write recommendation letters. Like sometimes students ask me, Professor, I'm applying for this grant or the scholarship. I really want to see where I can get the funding. And I said, okay, I'm willing to write a recommendation for you. And I did that. It is out of love. That is important for me. So I even have conduct mock interviews with some of my students. There was one student, I was unaware he was disabled. So I asked him in an interview. It's like what possibly the funder might be asking if he's been allocated the funds. So I asked him in the interview and he said, Prof, it's very tough questions. I said, these are the questions that they will ask. So that is more supportive and caring. connected. I connected some of my students to conferences. I belong to education. And in education, we have the Sierra Conference, we have the HASA Conference, we have different conferences locally and internationally. But I connected my students. Say, for example, my students, sometimes we use postgraduate, masters, and doctoral students conferences. I help the student with a PowerPoint. Sometimes it's not only the funding, but the student only want to present. So I help them. So my personal networks is where I know my colleague at this university have a project which my student is working on. So the student can link up that. And then they said, okay, what role the student can play? I said, my student can play a research assistant role. But the student is working, he don't have enough funding. So research assistant can also, and then the student get a contract to do maybe a literature review, the students may be empowered. So that is what important in the funding. Then organize. I like to be organized. So the first thing I sign is agreement with M&D students. I encourage my students for moral support, and if they have a problem with funding, I can then advise them what to do. If a student know that year the student didn't have enough funding, the student can ask for deferment of studies, meaning the supervisor is well informed what this deferment means, because the students say, okay, I put my doctoral study on hold, so I will not wasting my time because there's other things came up, so I will put my study in. So we call that deferment. So I help them not to waste their money if they study with their own private funding. If they have funding at the university and they cannot continue, we can also ask for deferment. And then that allocated funds is now then allocated to another student, and the student then lose that funding. But the student is not calculated the number of years when they do deferment. So what is the role that the supervisor need to play in helping? First of all, the first thing, I then introduce my students to internal funding at my institution. I tell them these are the internal funding opportunities. These are the external funding opportunities. Let's go into this external or internal funding. Do you qualify? What is the requirements? So as Prof. Moyo have indicated, there's certain requirements. So as a supervisor, play a crucial role and look into that funding opportunities. It's not to say to the student, go and see and read yourself. So you as a supervisor must also go and read. Assistance with the applications is very important. You don't want your student to submit. Students, I don't want you to see you submit an application that is full of spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, wrong budgeting. That is a bad reflection on your institution and yourself and the faculty or the college where you have studied. So those are very important. So the supervisor plays a critical role. He plays actually a quality assurance role in your application. How you formulate your covering letter, how you formulate your motivation for funding. Say, for example, you want to budget now for a recorder machine. You need to give a clear indication why you need it. So that is very important. Then leveraging from other networks. So as a supervisor, and if you know the funding, you are long into high institutions, you know the networks. You know, okay, that colleague in Australia or in America is working on that. Then you can ask that colleague whether my student can be part of that project, but align. I still remain the supervisor, but my student become part of that. And that person that have the funding can allocate an external bursary to the student. And I did it with one of my students. I got for my doctor's student because she was busy with gamification. She was doing different games in using as a teaching strategy. And she received funding from American person, which I have networks. Research assistance. Because I'm busy with external funding projects like your British Council, your Finnish. I'm part of the investigators in the project. So I link my students who cannot afford to be research assistants. Now, what is the role of research assistant? The research assistant is where you write out specific job description. A job description is what is then the administrative responsibility and the research within, and you allocate a certain percentage. So the student, if he is working and using own funds, I use that leverage. I use the research assistant to help. And by the way, we are building the capacity in the meantime with funding as well as research capacity with the student. And then I also encourage a good supervisor will definitely encourage you to present your research, whether you are now in the middle phase of your research or whether you are at the end, to go and present at a conference. If there is funding, if I have funding, then I send my students to say, present your research. I will pay for your conference fee, or I will pay for what means it. So I encourage the students to present at conference and don't be scared. That is always the first time. Then institutional resources, where you can find the financial aid officers and students at my institution and other like Stellenbosch and all. They get from time to time this information. And please, students, speak to your supervisor and then see what the two of you can, because you have in a partnership to build it. Then professional development, writing skills. It's not only the funding. You can have the funding, but if you're not completing your studies, what then? You need also to build that capacity. And what I'm doing with my PhD students, they are required to publish 2 articles with me currently. All my PhD students, they publish with me, they go. And the subsidy that I receive every second year the subsidy. So I use part of that subsidy, which I put in account. I help my students to go to conferences when they publish with me because their name appear on the publication. So it is encouraging for the student to help them to go to the conference, present. Sometimes I help them the PowerPoint. I said, okay, now I'm going with you to this conference, just present on behalf of us. So we already prepared the PowerPoint, the students said. So that is a crucial role, not only on funding, but to build capacity. That is my, because when I leave the university, someone else must come taking over, maybe the same student that I have supervised. Maybe that is that. Then provided further information, as I said, regular communication, university workshops and seminars, professional online databases, or I make available to students the websites where they can access funding. There's a lot of, I will show you now in the next slide or next slides. I also give mentorship and guidance. And then very important, assisting the postgraduate with the funding application. So if a student don't know how the NRF system is working, now you as a supervisor or the student listen hear from other students, now you need to apply for the NRF to took funding. And the student was never on that platform. How is the student getting the funding? So you as a supervisor must help the student. Say to the student, okay, you sit in Stellenbosch, I'm sitting in Pretoria. Let's go on Microsoft Teams. Show me, here's the platform, go into this is what you want to do. So you take the student as a coach to become a better student. So you identify suitable opportunities, as I said, grants, national research, internal funding. You understand the requirements. You need to understand the requirements as the supervisor, because sometimes the students are not aware of that. Students enroll and they want funding, but they don't know what is the requirement. So you need to go with them in a session. It takes half an hour to say to the student, okay, all the students who want to apply for funding, I set up a schedule at Microsoft Teams meeting, come to my session on a Saturday morning. So that is the love for people. And I promised myself I will never do what my 2 supervisors did with me when I was doing my PhD. So I tried to expose a student. So I helped them to develop a timeline. So timelines is very important. You need to set time. You cannot on the last day tell your supervisor, I want to apply for funding. The funding have a start and an end date for that call, and that call is closed, then you miss the train. So you need to set a clear example, and if your supervisor is alert, he or she will help you. Draft the application. That is also painful. And it can take a lot of time for you because you are new. You are busy with your doctoral study, you're busy with your master's, so you don't know how to draft the application. So if a supervisor was previously was granted all these grants, these funding, then he knew exactly what to do, and he will help you and guide you, and see that your application have a 80 to 90% chance to receive funding. When you're busy with the application with the student, if you are busy with the supervisor or busy with them, you need to review that application, that proposal from time to time. Sometimes overnight you got ideas, say to, oh, no, Prof, Van Wyk, I have to think about this thing in the grant. Then you have to change it, then that help you. It shows that you critically reflect on that. That even help the supervisor to think. Letters of recommendation. So many, as I said, many of my students ask me, Prof, can you please help me to write a motivation letter that I can get this internal bursary or external? Then with love, as I said, because we have nothing to lose. We only need to submit the letter, the recommendation letter or the motivation letter with your application. If you got the funding, then we are all happy. Now you can start your study. Then proofreading and editing is very important. As I said, I cannot read an application. By the way, I sometimes review a lot of NRF application external, and I see a lot of spelling mistakes, even from professors, even from senior lecturers when they submit for the grants. I see spelling mistake, grammatical errors. So that gave me, say, no, this thing was not meticulously, there was no care about this application. It was a rush application, and that is what I actually see. Even the letter they wrote is so in like not a professional tone. It's like you write to another student, like in a chat. You need to follow up if you submit your application. You and the supervisor can follow up to say, we have submitted, but we did not get acknowledgement. You cannot expect, now I submitted my funding grant or proposal for application internally and externally, and it took 3 months. You never heard anything from that officer. Supervisor, you need to, within 7 days, to write a very professional follow-up to say, my student have submitted an application. What is the status of? Don't fight with the people. Don't write in a fighting mode. These are also professionals, and you upset them, then you will not get the funding. But because you want the funding, so you need to write it in a very professional and an ethical manner. And then lastly, is encourage and still support the student if the student are not getting the funding. So that is it. Now here is what I do with most of my students. I even said to them, you have done your research, your doctor's degree, you have published with me. Let's see, you go to a conference, just present at a conference. You can only learn. There's always a first time. So there is social dynamics, and there's also operational dynamics. The operational dynamics is the box exercise. In that is where you have agreement, and then you set clear expectations. So your operational dynamics for funding is a tick box. You need to have this letter, that letter, and that letter. But the social dynamics is where you need to see how you help the student through the process. And that can be also a daunting task for the student. And then here is an example of one of my students. I supervised the student in 2017. Unaware the student was totally disabled. So the student was on a phone with a headset, and so he speak to me. Remember, I did not see my students. I work with numbers. So sometimes now I see the student. He's now, at that time, there was no MST. When we came on very late on the Moodle platform with MST. So I did not have the other means. So I supervised a student. At my graduation, I saw the student, and the student said, thank you, Professor, for helping me to get a bursary. Today, I'm graduated. When they push the student, they're up with the wheelchair facility. They're up. You know, I got tears in my eyes that night. How God had entrusted me with this child, with this student, and he helped the student to get funding. So you get different type of students. And I said to students, I will never let my students go through the process that I went through when it. So the student then went to a Sierra conference in 2019. I pay for the student conference. I said to the student, if you publish with me, you go with me. And today he's a doctor. He's a doctor at the university in Bow Triangle. What is it? Northwest University. He's there in Vereniging. He's a doctor today. You can see that he's in the wheelchair. So you see the type of student that I've helped. I could say to the student, no, I will not write them, but I'm unaware this was a student. So I give you one example. I have a student that was 69 years old. I supervise her. When she graduated, she was 73 years. And when she walked on the stage, when I started reading her validation, I was unaware. This is my student. I know what it was my student age at that time. So I was unaware that her children was also doctors and they was at UNISA. They never told me. So when I read the validation and how she got funding, she was so glad. She even hugged me on that stage. You know what? That is what I'm saying. I'm servicing humanity. And that gives me such a joy to help students with funding. So I help the students how to write effective covering letters for their proposals. It's part of my nature to help people. Because when I was standing on the street at the age of 11, that man that took me from the street and put me in his house, and today I'm a professor. I still remember those years. I still remember the pain I went through to do my PhD. So I did not take these things for granted, and therefore I helped the student. I was unaware the student was disabled, and that night he graduated with a master's, and he published with me. He read the paper with me at the Sierra conference, and years later he became a doctor. But that is the possibilities. And then here's a couple examples what we do at our institution. I supervise permanent employees at my institution. There's colleagues in my department. I supervise them. So they are studying, say for example, in brackets for free, but they can apply for internal grants, even at your institution, if you're an academic currently. And we have a policy, we call it the Masters and Doctoral Support Program. So we support them. So there's no excuse for a person that's not completing his master's or doctoral student at my institution. There's also for women in research. Now, this particular grant, internal grant, is ring-fenced. It's framed for whether you are 60 years old, whether you are 20 years old, you qualify as a female student or an academic at my institution. You qualify for that. And it all depends how's your budget and how's your project. You still need to have a project and a budget. The second thing is we make provision for postgraduate bursaries because we as academics contribute to a fund at my institution. So every month they deduct a certain amount from my salary, goes into the postgraduate bursary, and the university gives me a tax rebate on that. So when I submit my tax to SARS, it was deducted. So the students that were struggling with funding, I need to say, the honor students, the master and doctor students, they all qualified, whether you are an international student or a South African student, but we have now putting a formula. So 60, I think 70% South African students qualify for this bursary, and 30% of international students are qualified also for the bursary. And then the supervisor only need to submit a motivation online. Everything is online and the students can qualify for that. So we help students that cannot afford. That is what we want to see, that the students complete their studies in the time frame. If the students cannot support, then defer the student to the next. Externally, I have an NRF grant. So, as I said to students, I have an NRF grant, plus I have a collaborative international grant from the British Council. So my students, I make provision for the students for a bursary, whether you are a master's student or a PhD student. So there's an amount that I have budgeted for the 3 years in my NRF project as well as in my British Council. So I cannot give my student double dipping. If I know the student is getting a bursary from my project, then the student cannot apply for the bursary because there's no time for double dipping. So we give rather to another needy students. We also have postdoc fellows. I budget for that in my project. So I'm not advertising that you must come to us, UNISA. No, I said this is what I try to say and help the students where I see students are needing. And some of these students are teachers in the classroom. Some of them are subject advisors. Some of them can afford, but we indicate which students are totally in need, so we help the student. Then externally, research funding project that I'm busy with up till 2027. I appoint some of my students as research assistants. There's a policy at the institution that is for research assistants. So they help me with data collection, they help me with field work. So master students is also included. So the requirement to be a research assistant, you need to have a master's and you need to have a doctoral, busy with your doctoral study. If you are busy with your master's, okay, we can see you over. In my case, I write the motivation. You only have an honors. You're busy with your master's. So we will then appoint you as a research assistant. If you are full-time, much better. If you are part-time, you can still be part of a research assistant. Why? Because we build capacity and we help you with funding. And we clearly stipulate your role. And then here are a couple of external and internal external grants. And that is that all those things, all the grants are there. You will get this PowerPoint presentation, which is live. When you click on it, you will see the different. Thank you very much for my last 5 minutes. And here's something for you to think that I leave you on the screen. And that is my story. Thank you very much. I hope I will get questions, Doc van der Berg. If I can get a couple of questions, I love to answer that. As a supervisor, it's a very important role to play.
Yeah. Thank you so much, for that. And, we will most definitely make sure that everybody, get the slides, if you can forward them to us with the links that you have. But, let's open up for questions. We still have about, 10 minutes to go before we do the conclusion. I see there's a first question. Prof. Moyo has got a question for you, Prof. van Wyk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Michael, it's really an interesting story and really shows the resilience. I just wanted to thank you really for the time that you take as a supervisor to work with your students on what they are doing. So really from my side, it's to acknowledge that. And then I believe that if every supervisor did at least even 80 or 90% of what you are doing, we would have less problems in the system. So I just want to thank you for that and the example that you show on my side. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. If a student agreed to, I must supervise a student, the student sign a commitment, a declaration. In 3.5 years, you finish your studies. I don't want to have people in the system. So it's every month I want a draft of your chapter of half of a page. I work consistently. I got a tracking system. I use this platform as a tracking system. So artificial intelligence helped me to track the students, to say, where is the students? What is happening? If I could not find the student for a month, then there's a problem. I know it. So I then say to the student, please talk to me. I'm still your supervisor. We're not keeping quiet. So you need to finish your study. There's no time for time wasting. Let's do it. That is how I work.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And it's really an example to all supervisors, who are on the platform and those who are supervising students. Because, in the end, it is really teamwork, and we know how daunting a task it is for any person to apply for funding. I really also want to say from the side of the Postgraduate Forum, we are committed to present a grant writing workshop within at least the first 2 months of next year, so that we can provide a service, because it's clear from the questions that there are many questions. And then we can even rope in Prof. van Wyk also, to share his expertise. Any other questions from colleagues or those on the platform?
Okay, so Professor, in the interest of time, I'm going to go over some of the questions that we have in the chat as well as the Q&A, if that's okay.
Yes, that
Oh,
is fine.
Okay, first question from Makubo, a participant, says supervisor guidance is an underrated aspect of struggling with not just funding, but being a postgraduate. With the power imbalance in the student supervisor relation, how do we, as students, hold supervisors accountable to abuse, mistreatment, or inactivity without jeopardizing our careers?
I like that question. You have a responsibility. Remember, you are registered under a particular department in a faculty. You need to know what is the protocol for disciplinary actions. That is clear. You need to know. If you are not exposed, your postgraduate office need to inculcate that awareness of what is your responsibility as well as the supervisor. So the supervisor cannot abuse you. Even the way the supervisor write to you is inhumane. If he write to you, you write a lot of rubbish. Remember that I received from my supervisors when I did not know where to complain. I was so frustrated when I go to the head of department where I was located in that faculty. It's like, no, you're telling stories, Michael van Wyk. I'm not listening to you. Where did you hear it? I said, but I have concrete. So if you sign agreement, there's also that we need to have both sides of the coin, Mr. Makubu. So it's very important that you know what is your particular rights as a postgraduate student, because there is policies that direct you as a student and direct you as a supervisor. You cannot be in an abusive relationship. By the way, that supervisor will not last with you. You will quote him, you will ask a supervisor that is caring, that is helping you and thinking about you. 95% of my students is black students. And some of them coming from very troubled situations. I first listen to what they have to say to me before I can say, I need your proposal. So there's a clear communication, open line. You need to care for them. You need to tell them, listen, I went through this. How can we solve this problem? Now I have a bereavement in my family, Prof. Now this other supervisor will not understand it because he said, but I need your chapters. Now he said, you are lazy and stuff. So sometimes supervisors must also take care of the student, of the human part of the student. But there are policies at your institution, Mr. Makubu. So you need to access that policies, reading it, and you can write a complaint if you want to write a complaint. But therefore, the academic is paid what he's supposed to do. If he sign up with you, he must take responsibility for that actions. And if he abuse you, you need to report. You can't keep quiet. That is what I want to say. Thank you. Another question?
Okay, so we have another question from another participant, MC. And MC says, thank you for organizing this much needed support. What are the constraints, if any, to using funding for one's research? Are there things one should be aware of or maybe avoid before applying for funding?
Okay, to answer that question, I'm not sure which is that person, but you need to first look at the requirements. If the requirements is the funding is only for 1 year, and you need to complete the proposal stage. If you did not complete the proposal stage, they will not pay out the total number of funds for that proposal. So there's a clear direction, there's a clear requirement. So as a supervisor, you need also to take note of that. So that is very important. Secondly, the issue is about yes, you as a student are fully responsible for that fund that was allocated to you. If 50,000 rand is been paid to you for the year, the university can ask a reconciliation statement from you to say, where did you spend that money? Did you buy a laptop? Did you buy, when did you went to a conference? Did you pay for language editing? If you spend it on consumables, then you are in trouble because the funding was not allocated for that purpose. So you need also to take cognizance of, it's not your money, it's taxpayers' money or funders' money. So the supervisor and you taking full responsible for that funding. Thank you very much. And the supervisor need to write a report about how you spend that funding. I did it on a yearly basis with my students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response, Professor. From the same participant, this is probably a follow-up question. The participant says, I work at the career services, and once in a while, I receive a request from a student to help with a cover letter for funding. This is not my forte since I work with recruiters, not funders, but I would like to equip myself with this skill. Would Professor Van Wyk be open to meeting with me on a different day to give me some pointers?
Yes, surely. I got a lot of examples of how to write very strong, convincing, compelling, covering letter for an application because I went through the process. I've capacitated me, so I'm willing to say that. But I believe when Dr. Van der Berg is now hosting the writing type, it's very important to write compelling, but I can also share that information with you because I have submitted through my students and the students are getting funding. Even when the students, when applying for a postdoc award, like anything, I write a compelling a memo or a motivation why the student need to get the postdoc award or research award. So I'm used to that and I will share that knowledge with you. So one of my strengths is sharing. That is what I also find out in my 31 years at the high institution to share with someone. Tomorrow I'm no more here. I did not share that knowledge. So as I said, I'm in service of humanity. So I like to share.
Thank you so much, Professor. And, we have really run out of time. We want to thank you for that. As we continue working towards, helping to support our students and our supervisors, I think it would be a good idea if we ask all the colleagues from postgraduate support officers who are on this portal this afternoon to also share with us perhaps examples for a worksheet for a grant application and resources like that, or even, links to your websites with resources that you have available, because I know there are many postgraduate support officers who are represented here this afternoon. Colleagues, as we conclude, I once again want to say thank you to Professor Van Wyk and Professor Moyo for the pointers that they have been given us. We will also share the link to the recording with you and the resources that we have shared in the chat. So thank you to all of you. Before we go, I just want to say something about the Postgraduate Forum. And, we have been presenting similar workshops to this, like in February, for example, we did a workshop on supervising the postgraduate degree through article format, where Prof. Lee did a workshop on that. And then I also want to announce on the 25th of November, we have a face-to-face workshop at STIAS in Stellenbosch, where we will focus on the role of AI and, not just large language models like ChatGPT, but similar AI tools and the impact on postgraduate research, especially the integrity of the research. So we will share that invitation to all of you on this portal. Those who are interested, please save the date of 25 November. We already have colleagues lined up talking on different aspects related to AI. And there's a differential prices for those who are members and those who are not members. I know when you registered, many of you indicated you would like to register as members. And in the next week, we will send out more information to all of you, so that you can most definitely register to become a member. Our membership fee for students is, for instance, just 50 rands a year, because we realize you are students, you are not working colleagues. The membership fee for staff members or working staff members are only 300 rands per year. So it definitely is worth the while. we share resources, and we also have at least 2 to 3 events per year. So look out for our email with our information about the Postgraduate Forum, and we are looking forward to see all of you at our event on the 25th of November in Stellenbosch at STIAS. Thank you so much for your time, your participation, and once again to our 2 presenters. We really, benefited from your valuable pointers on how to support our students for their postgraduate studies. Thank you so much, colleagues. We really appreciate your time. Have a great day. And then we will hope to see you at least, in the next few months, if not at Stellenbosch, online for a postgraduate funding workshop. Thank you so much. And with this, we conclude the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, students. All the best with your studies. Thank you, and your funding applications.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.